Are you, oh, there she is. Okay, so we'll formally start now. Welcome to the Stoa, everyone. Today we have Gail Bradbrook with us. Gail is an environmental activist and co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. And according to their website, it's a decentralized, international, and politically nonpartisan movement using nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience to persuade governments to act justly on the climate and ecological emergency. So here at the Stoa, we've been looking at different groups addressing what we call the meta crisis, like effective altruism, the extra folks, doomer optimism, and of course, Extinction Rebellion. And it's a group that's not without its controversy. And speaking of which, Gail is fresh off of being arrested today at 8:30 a.m. her time, I believe. I think it was a conspiracy to cause criminal damage and fraud in relation to the Money Rebellion's debt disobedience campaign. So I imagine we're going to get into that pretty soon. So how today's going to work, I'm going to have a quick conversation with Gail. And if you have any questions, start putting them in the chat right now. I'll call on you, ask your question to Gail, unmute yourself and ask your question to Gail. If you don't want to be on YouTube, just indicate that and I'll ask your question on your behalf. And then Gail, just to prime you, the questions are going to be all over the place because the Stoa is a kind of a weird space. So that being said, yeah, how are you doing? I think that maybe we should start there.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for that welcome, Peter. And I do apologise for being late. It was 5:30 a.m. my time this morning that I was arrested. So about 5 o'clock, there was a big knock at the door. I was fast asleep. I pictured this thing happening at some point, but you never know if and when it will. You go down with your dressing gown and there's the police on your doorstep raiding your house. They took my phone from me and my computer equipment and took me away and arrested me. And I was released in the afternoon. So so it's a bit of a traumatic experience, and I've just come from another interview. I didn't want to miss these interviews. And I do hope that I'm functioning well enough. So I've just done an hour of an interview, and it's a little bit mental in some ways to go from being arrested and charged with two offences that could lead to 10 years in jail, and come out and do a couple of things like this. I think I'm all right, but just please forgive me if I start to need a few minutes to gather myself. Thank you.
Yeah. For sure. And if you feel like you need to tag out anytime, we can always end it. And yeah, I am most curious, like how are you processing it? Like just right now, anything?
So I mean, I think partly because I've been it was such a big prayer for me, Extinction Rebellion, mass civil disobedience, and it was a long time in coming, and I actually got some not very helpful legal advice early on that I could get charged with conspiracy and that would be up to maximum life imprisonment. It made me really paranoid. But it depends what the conspiracy charges are. And so anyway, the point that I'm trying to say is that I've thought about this a lot and thought about the risks that I'm taking. And I don't want to sound grandiose and sort of a bit weird. And the reality is I feel in service to life and I feel at peace with it. That said, I also did some trauma release exercises in the cell, some tapping and some of that, business that you get up to. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm interested to talk about the trauma stuff and then get into the Money Rebellion campaign. But for people like who might just be here not having any idea what Extinction Rebellion is, like who's this lady that's coming from fresh off of being arrested, perhaps at like a high level, you can explain maybe what the movement is, and then like related to what you just said too, that kind of philosophical alignment that you feel you have towards life, how does that infused in the movement's objectives in your view?
So Extinction Rebellion is an organisation with the sort of purpose of mass civil disobedience focused on the climate and ecological crisis. We have a theory of change that mass civil disobedience helps to bring about change if you can get a certain percentage of people on the streets we have principles and values, 10 of them. I won't say what they all are, but things like a regenerative approach. I'm not saying we always do it, to how we bring about our activism. We're absolutely focused on non-violence. And we also have said that grief is part of these times and that we welcome emotion. I think that's been an important part of Extinction Rebellion. We've been focused on the science. We use momentum-driven organising, which I can explain in more detail if wanted. And we try to organise in a decentralised way so that anybody can do things in the name of Extinction Rebellion if they follow our 10 principles and values. So they don't need to get permission from anybody. So in that way, there's no like leader who's in charge who tells everybody what to do. I think it's a mistake though to say we're a leader-less movement. We'd like to be a leader-full movement. Talk more about that. And we have 3 demands, and they're relatively simple. One is for governments and businesses and institutions to tell the truth about these times, about what we're facing, to tell the full truth. The second is to have a really rapid reduction in carbon emissions. We've said to net zero by 2025. The main point is that there's no carbon budget left, and we just have to cut emissions really quickly and to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. And the third is how we go about doing that. It's not for Extinction Rebellion to say that we want deliberative forms of democracy like citizens' assemblies to look at together with experts. And if again I can explain what citizens' assemblies are, but they can come up with legislation for change. So ordinary people selected like a jury at random, representing the demographics of a country to come up with a change.
And I'm curious about your personal history and your philosophical kind of lineage here. I know you're influenced by Ken Wilber and kind of like that spiral dynamic framework. And so perhaps you can speak a little bit about how that informed how this organization got created.
Yeah. So, I mean, there were like at least 10 of us that were part of co-founding Extinction Rebellion with different orientations. So I can talk about mine, but and I have to want of a better phrase, a spiritual orientation, and I'm interested in sort of concept of teal consciousness and the shifts in humanity. And that's not necessarily everybody else's orientation. I think it is quite infused in XR, and we also would want other people to feel welcome in our spaces who have a different philosophy of life, you know. For myself, I've been part of a tradition that sits in ceremony with psychedelic medicines. We were taught by Indigenous leader. It was gifted to us that approach, and so it doesn't feel to me like cultural appropriation, just to say that. And to me, it's a remembering of our Indigenous roots in this country. So you know, I'm from the UK, and the Indigenous people of the UK were deeply connected to the land in the time of Boudica, the Celtic tradition, and we were driven from these lands, and we were traumatized, I think, and we were traumatized through the burning of the witches and the herbalists and the midwives. And I think those traumas remain in our bodies, and that's part of what's being healed in these times. We're reclaiming our indigeneity and our connection to the land.
And one thing that was very interesting, or we're very interested in here at the Stoa, is like the trauma, or some people call it the trauma scene. How does the trauma work inform Extinction Rebellions, and maybe what kind of practices or psychotechnologies that are embedded in the group, the organization?
Yeah. So we talk about having a regenerative culture, and we're not telling people what kind of practices to do, but asking people to take care of themselves. I have to say, you know, it's a rebellious act to love and take care of yourself in a culture that wants you to drive yourself off a cliff, and especially the sort of so-called Protestant work ethic in the UK and activist culture and all the rest of it. And there's a really, I think, worth interviewing, by the way, Peter, a beautiful colleague of mine, Skeena Rathor, who's a trauma specialist, who's working on co-liberation as an approach for Extinction Rebellion, to look at how oppression shows up in social movements and issues around the dynamics of power and so on. And I mean, we can get into talking about this, but, you know, we have, one of our principles and values is no blaming and shaming. And some of the ways in which we want to talk about how racism and classism and sexism and so on can show up, it can be done from that kind of perspective. And we want to do it from a way that honors the reality of the trauma that we all carry, and the different aspects of, I guess, you know, depending on which identity you have, which bit of your humanity you're allowed to hang on to, and which bit gets attempted to be taken away from you. And so it feels very much about focusing on the body. And I'm not saying this is a common practice in Extinction Rebellion, but certainly when I'm in meetings, part of the regenerative practice I'll bring is to do a grounding, a body grounding, or do a little trauma practice, trauma release practice. I don't know the names of all these things. I mean, I use you sort of tap in. I was doing that in the cell today, that kind of stuff. So yeah.
And perhaps it'd probably be good to discuss, like, maybe what happened, why it happened. So the Money Rebellion campaign, maybe you can speak about what that is.
So, you know, Extinction Rebellion came out of a group called Rising Up. And if you can look up our stuff online, I think there's documents flying around anyway about where our thinking was. So XR was like a campaign of this group. And this group was saying that, you know, we have a fundamental issue at a systemic level of the political economy that we have, that's wedded to growth and debt. It's based in a sort of patriarchal culture, traumatizes us. You know, nobody's asking for this, the systemic trauma in the culture. And so I guess, and I would speak to a holistic theory of change and talk about our separation from the divine as well, right? But the Money Rebellion is a kind of evolution of Extinction Rebellion. It's an aspect to Extinction Rebellion that I've been leading, and it's to focus on the political economy. And it's very similar to Extinction Rebellion, tell the truth that the economic system we have incentivizes harm. You know, I don't want to be talking about Barclays Bank like it's full of bad apples, right? It's good people. On the whole, I imagine we've all got our shadow and that, but who are incentivized by a psychopathic system that's wedded to growth for the sake of growth, and growth for the sake of growth is cancer. I mean, in the indigenous cultures, in the Algonquin languages, it's called wetiko, right? When you have this hungry ghost hunger, where you just have to keep feeding yourself and you're never full. And that's the kind of way in which we've set up our economic system. And it's the sort of, you know, patriarchal trauma of scarcity, separation, and powerlessness. That's sort of the story that we're living under in these times. I'm very excited to see the work you're doing with Rebel Wisdom, by the way. I hope my boyfriend's going to get the door, and it's great stuff there, and the stuff that Jamie Wheel's coming out with at the minute. It's so cool to see these folks thinking through what the new ways are going to be, and how to work through our trauma together.
Right.
And I heard from Charles Eisenstein that you know, gosh, my own personal journey of trying to heal from trauma has been, and you know, it's like banging your head on a wall. I don't know, since I was a teenager, doing things like co-counseling and many things, transformational breathing and all sorts of stuff. And I'm sure it's all helped in some ways, maybe not, I don't know. But I feel that the fact that we're getting closer to understanding the effectiveness of these technologies, and it's different ones that will work in different situations with different people and working together on, it's very exciting to me. I noticed today, actually, the Times newspaper have, who are on the right in the UK, have come after me a bit because of use of psychedelics as medicines, and they do try and make you sound like a bit of a nutter. There's so much science there. It's a rude on many fronts, but there's like a body of indigenous wisdom that goes back for centuries. So like cultural racism to talk about that stuff as if it's foolish. And then there's also as I know you'll know, Peter, just a growing body of science about the value of those medicines in healing trauma.
Right. And I'm going to take in Rosa a moment because she has a really good follow-up question for that. And so start putting your questions in the chat, everyone. We got some good ones already, and it's going to be you can get like all kinds of perspectives at you, Gail. So just it's going to be a little weird maybe, but we'll take in Rosa first. Can you? Yeah.
Hello, Gail. I'm just so excited that you're here, and thank you so much for all that you're doing. Which question did you have in mind, Peter? Because I had put a couple up there.
You had one on cultural trauma, but whatever one's alive for you, feel free to ask it.
Yeah. Well, I want to say a couple of things. I feel so strongly about the importance of nonviolence, and I'm so glad that XR has made that one of the like very clear conditions for so many reasons, from practical ones that it's so easy for, demonstrations to get infiltrated by people promoting violence. We saw a lot of that here at anti-WTO protests at Seattle, other places, afterwards in Europe. Starhawk has written a lot about that. So I just love that you have that. And my question about cultural trauma is that I feel like we're carrying a lot of cultural trauma. And there's one question that few people tend to talk about, which I just kind of became aware of through a conversation with someone about, wow, it was Y2K. So it was 20 years ago now. But, and I feel like I haven't known what to do in response, but it seems to me like the elite in this country and in other countries are still carrying a lot of historical trauma around the French Revolution and the French Terror. And, so like in corporate or even big business or anything, it's like this expression, heads are going to roll around here. Like, to me, that's really an evidence that those series of events had happened where, and it wasn't just the elite, it was like people who one day were part of the organization and the next week were, in the guillotine, or were part of the revolutionary organization, et cetera. So I guess I just kind of want to bring that up and wonder if you have any thoughts you might offer on this.
Thanks for your question, Rosa. Yeah, there's a lot in there. I think I've not thought about that. I think it's an interesting perspective. I remember, I think, a billionaire from the States talking about they'll be coming at us with the pitchforks type of thing. So maybe some people are guillotines or the pitchforks, whichever cultural reference it is. And I think there's a really specific trauma in the UK amongst the elites when, I might just close the door actually, there's a lot of noise from the rain. I don't know if you can hear it, just sorry, give me a second. So the deal for the elites in the UK is that you get separated from your family around age 7. You're probably being raised by a nanny anyway and separated quite a bit from your parents. And then you get sent to what's called, strangely, the public school system. It's private schools where there is like institutionalized abuse. People get raped and bullied, and there's a whole pile of trauma work happening now from psychotherapists and others on public school recovery. And so, one of the things I often think is, I'm a working class background. My dad was a coal miner, and in my heritage, like as a woman as well, told that I'm not worth anything as a working class woman, and that's kind of like a big strong message, and to be ashamed and all that, right? But it's actually quite easy in some ways, clear, let's say, what the direction of travel is. Oh no, I am worth something, and then off you go in that direction. But what does it mean to tell people that you're better than everybody else, that you deserve more, that you're also dangerous? This is what I'm talking about. It's talk to like white, middle and upper class men. That what you do is more important than who you are, that you don't get to feel anything. I mean, one of our politicians his name gone out of my head right now. He said he hasn't cried since he was 15. You know, you're not allowed to feel anything, and that you think the rest of the world's out to get you. I don't know how you survive with that. And one of the things that I've talked about in Extinction Rebellion is reweaving the family, and that means all of us. You know, that means all of us. It's including our brothers and sisters who are in the upper classes. Yeah.
Any quick follow-up, Rosa?
Oh my, so much here. I really appreciate the emphasis on trauma work, the emphasis on regenerative culture, so that activists don't, burn ourselves out, etc. And and I guess the other topic that is super close to my heart is this one about deliberative democracy. Some people call it empowered participatory governance. Some people call it democratic innovations, but just the larger sense. And I've followed a little bit the work of future democracy and trust the people and all that, but just this sense that we really need to figure out how to govern ourselves and just really transition and change and all that. And I just find XR incredibly exciting in that area. So I would love to hear any of your current thoughts on all this.
I mean, what's really exciting about that, I think, is XR's seen some changes that we're really pleased about, and and to stay in some humility about this, there have been other people like Fridays for the Future and the Sunrise Movement and 350.org and the work of Arthur David Attenborough. There's a lot of stuff out there that's supported change. But one of the things that I'm really pleased about is that I once said that I thought Extinction Rebellion was as much about democracy as it was about the environment. It's just the environment is the most obvious manifestation to me. I mean, other people may be looking at other aspects like the mental health of young people or racial injustice. One of the most obvious aspects of a democratic political economy, so-called democratic, this not working for us. And what's interesting is that I think there's a split in the elites now. I mean, as ever, there always was, I guess, but it's become really apparent. There's a light shining through that crack. So you've got the Davos elite through the Great Reset saying we need to make great changes here, that we can't carry on having this version of capitalism and so on. And then you've got, I don't know if you've read Democracy in Chains. Yeah, great book. I'm still reading it, but took it to the cells today actually. But anyway, a part of the elite that really don't care about any form of democracy, and have got a way to get us to not even be interested. So there's something really important, as you said, about these forms of deliberative democracy that are about trusting ourselves to be able to self-govern. And what's been exciting is that, that aspect of the elite, like The Economist magazine put out a video saying we should have more citizens' assemblies and deliberative democracy. Our former Prime Minister Gordon Brown said the same, and the Royal Society of Arts lead as well. So, there's a lot more focus on that need, because I think as a really brilliant person from, I feel my brain forgetting the names of people, so I do apologise to them, but from what was called the Dark Mountain, which I think was, to put it this way, was a sort of form of morphic resonance that supported XR in that they used the environmentalists that said this isn't working. We've got to go and grieve what we're doing here. The Dark Mountain was a process of artists coming together to face these times. What fantastic work! And one of their founders said that we're in a stage now where we're heading in the direction of more democracy or less. And I don't know where this is going, but we need to sow the seeds for more democracy. And I guess possibly it's both is going to happen.
And it's the person who founded the Dark Mountain Project might be coming to Stoa soon, so that's interesting.
Which one? Just give me the.
What's his name again?
You're doing the same as me. Good.
It was the gentleman. His name slips my mind, but he's
never mind. It doesn't matter. Anyway, yeah. there was a couple of guys.
Yeah.
I think maybe.
I'll take in Evan next. He has a question about the money recent situation with the money protest.
Hi, Gail. Thanks for coming on today. I know you've been through a lot today, obviously, and so we really appreciate your time. I'm wondering if you could draw some comparisons between some of the strategies that were used for Extinction Rebellion versus Money Rebellion. I mean, as far as I can tell with Extinction Rebellion, the massive sort of buildup of public awareness through civil disobedience was always justified by the ends being raising mass awareness about climate change. And I get sort of muddled when I look at Money Rebellion. There doesn't seem to be a lot of information on Money Rebellion that I could find online. And so I'm interested to get your opinion there of how they mirror each other maybe, and how they also deviate. When I hear about what happened earlier today, where there's talk of individuals who have gone on some sort of debt strike, I suppose, with their credit debt. I wonder if that is still in service in your mind of the end. Do the means still justify the end there? And is it still in the spirit of generating public awareness? Or is there something different at work there?
Wow, there's a lot in there. Great, and thanks for that question. It's a great question, Evan. Just in terms of the information that's online about Money Rebellion, there's a talk that's on YouTube, and there's versions of people giving similar versions, but different versions of the talk. And there's also a website, and that you should, from the website, get a 2-pager that will sort of tell you about the different things that we're offering. I mean, Extinction Rebellion is very experimental, I would say. You know, so Money Rebellion is part of Extinction Rebellion, and we try different things. And maybe I just my mind, I think I've got ADHD, and it goes off in like all the tangents that came out of your question. It's just where to start. So first of all, there's a question of money and its role in destroying the planet. And when money's created as a debt, in the way it's created, the interest-bearing debt. Professor Jem Bendell, who came out with the paper on deep adaptation in 2018, which is part of the zeitgeist of these times, has released a recent paper about how debt necessarily fuels destruction. There was a review of 850 different papers looking at what they call decoupling. Could you carry on having economic growth in the way that we measure it in GDP, and not destroy the planet? And there's technical arguments in there, but the answer is, on the top level, is there's no such thing as green growth, right? You have to do something different. And so what we're trying to do with Money Rebellion is have a couple of layers of conversation. One is about, you know, the finance system and the fact that the banks have put $3.8 trillion into planet destroying projects since the Paris Agreement. So we need to change the money pipeline, if you want to put it like that. But it's also about the wider economic system and how it's got destruction baked in, and how we have to do it differently. Now, question economic growth a while ago might have got you called an extremist, and the Tories here tried to say that any teacher putting that in their curriculum was not allowed to, and you can't use extremist material and all that. The Bank of International Settlements had a paper called the Green Swan paper, and they start questioning economic growth in there. You know, the BIS, the IMF's question growth. I think, as I like to say, we need a grown-up conversation about the political economy. And how do you do it? You draw attention to it, and non-payment of debt and non-payment of taxes. There's a Nobel history in both of them that we can build from, and I think they're just perfectly reasonable, non-violent tactics. Any of these tactics come with risk, and so I don't see. I'd be interested to hear, Evan, where you're seeing maybe an ends and means problem here, and I can also then talk about the what I believe is critically the non-violence of the window breaking that we've done as well. But if you maybe might say more about where your concerns, I think you've got a concern about ends and means in this program.
Sure, yeah. So I guess in terms of the means versus the end and the visual aspect of this, non-payment of debt to me is far less visual, I suppose, and draws far less attention than demonstrations in the street, for instance. And so that's where I see a bit of a difference between those two strategies.
Okay.
And then in terms of the non-payment of debt, the means versus the end, I'm with you where we have a growth problem within our economy. And with you where if you are in tune at all with sort of this game A versus game B dynamic that people have discussed, or the traditional methods of economic growth versus the potential methods of economic growth moving into the future. I also agree that the mode of economic generation we're currently sitting with had no brakes attached to it and is inherently, in a way, sort of self-terminating. And so that's the end. The means, I suppose, I question only because defaulting on debt or refusal to pay debt, at this point, given the power structures that are set up to dissuade individuals from pursuing those kinds of paths, seem perfectly set up to disaggregate a collective of individuals who decide to default on debt. And what I mean by that is, it's something that is in some ways a one-way ticket to high fines or prison. And I wonder whether those means of potentially disaggregating the organization through having individuals potentially incarcerated justify the end there, as well as the problems that some people may draw to defaulting on personal debt. Is that really in service to the greater economic issues that we're dealing with today?
Thanks again for your explanations and questions. So what we're trying to do in Extinction Rebellion is have a number of ways in which people can participate. So for some people, getting on the streets is something that they can do. For others, that's more difficult. One of the people leading on a debt strike is a GP. And she's not worried about her credit rating. So, you know, it depends on the debt and it depends on the jurisdiction that you're in. So we've got a legal and financial toolkit for the UK, and we tell people what we understand will be the implications of what they do, and they can take these things so far. So, for example, if people chose not to pay their mortgages, that's a very big deal, right? But we can use conditional commitment. You might only do it if several thousand people joined you. Well, that idea has already got traction in terms of it gets us onto news programs to talk about it. People might just do it for a few months and then stop, you know. I mean, there's like what I call peaceful mischief. There's lots of, my friend Jojo invented that term, but there's lots of ways of playing with the system, and individuals can take it as far as they want. And we get into Telegram groups and we talk about what's happening to us, those of us that have taken on credit cards with Barclays and aren't paying the debts off at the moment. I'm just going to, the door's gone. I'm so sorry. I'm just, oh no, somebody's getting it. Thank you. Sorry. Have you heard the door, Toe? Yeah. Sorry about that. So, you know, individuals have to make their own choices about how they want to participate, but so that's about the risks. In terms of the sort of visibility of non-payment of debt, it depends if we get coverage. There's a lot of coverage today. They're accusing me of trying to mass defraud the banks, and I have to admit what a lot of fun we're already having with that. You know, the banks, can you imagine the banks coming after me for fraud? I didn't pay, I'm not paying at the minute £70 on a credit card, right, about $100. They've been involved in rigging LIBOR in the FinCEN files, in the Panama Papers, in the LuxLeaks, you know, like mass fraud, the most epic scale, and Gail didn't pay 70 quid. It's just like, it's funny, like it's just so with any of these tactics, it's what power are we expressing through them. And Tim G in his book Counterpower was talking about physical power, like our protectors. I'm very UK focused. I do apologise. That's my focus. So that's where I feel my responsibility. And I know we're environmental activists across the world, not just in XR, obviously in other movements. And we've got protectors who built tunnels to stop them doing HS2. So they're using their body as physical counterpower. And then there is idea power, and then there is economic power. And mass debt refusal could be an economic power, but it might also just be an idea power. You know, it gets me on a radio show and they say, like the police were saying to me today in the interview, well, you know, you've taken the money from the bank. I was like, have I taken money from the bank? Should we talk about modern monetary theory? Where did that money come from? You know, so we get to start having that conversation on mainstream programs. 9 out of 10 MPs in the UK don't understand about how money's created. It's created as a debt at that moment. They don't have, it's not their money. Oh, well, you know, you've broken their windows, I have to pay for them. No, it's an insurance company. I pay for them. You know, it's not the banks. Like, it's just, let's actually talk about how this economic system works. So and I think the other thing about debt as well is the idea that cancelling debt could happen. You know, you probably know this, but the line in the Lord's Prayer, as it's called, that says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. If you go back to the original language, it's forgive us our debts as we forgive those who owe us money. It's a debt forgiveness. You know, Jesus was a debt campaigner, and he campaigned in the financial institutions, in the temples, turning them over, right? So the stories go. So I think we want to have these conversations, and we're just trying stuff, frankly. I really love the repair harm action because and that's the credit card action with Barclays Bank. And it's interesting because on the one hand, people say, you know, how can you smash the windows? Why don't you do something else? And we're like, well, we did this other protest, it got no publicity, right? But so it even works in that way, to say, well, we've tried this, and this, you know. But in the repair harm action, what people have done is to take out credit cards, or they could use the ones they already have, and they're giving the money to Survival International, who support the frontline fights of Indigenous people across the world. What a beautiful vision holds in action, I think, to repair the harm that's being done on behalf of the banks. So, you know, we're not doing a fraud, we're making a donation on their behalf. And of money that's not theirs anyway, in a finance system that doesn't make any sense anyway. So I look forward to that day in court to talk to the jury about how the money system works. Do you see what I mean? Then I think you were sorry, and I've slightly lost what you were saying around the sort of economic system and growth and so on. And we're not here to promote an economic alternative. I just don't think it's like that. I really love Mariana Mazzucato's new book on mission-based economic system, where you know, it feels very Teal, actually, Peter, just go back to the, you know, point about Ken Wilber, her thing. It's not, we're not going to say we're anti this and pro that. I just think, oh, those days are gone. You know, what do we want from our economic system? What mission are we focused on? The mission to repair the harm that we've done, to stop the harm, to prepare for crises. That's what humanity needs to focus on. What kind of economic system? What should grow? What don't need to grow? What can we degrow? Donut economics, you know, bioregional economics, circular. I don't know. You know, I mean, they all sound cool to me. And that's why we want a citizens' assembly. So that's why we say we'll do these, you know, things around debt and tax and on the street protests and window breaking if that's where people are willing to go. And we'll have, and one way or another, we'll have this conversation. I'll maybe end by saying, I love this line from Emmeline Pankhurst of the suffragettes, and she said, we're getting it exactly right, but the argument of the broken pane is the most valuable argument in modern politics. And that's how I've got the vote in the UK and how the men got the vote through the charters.
It's an awesome response. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Evan. We'll might have time for two more. We'll take in Jeff next. Jeff D.
Hi, Gail. Thanks for taking questions. I really appreciate what you're doing, what you're volunteering yourself for, and all of this. My question is a little bit more abstract, I guess, maybe, and I don't expect you to be a sort of like an official representative of this topic or anything, but I've just been very interested in this tension that there seems to be in some of the emerging communities around parenting and having children. And I know that there's you know, there's a group that calls themselves Birth Strike that is, you know, somewhat attached to XR, who are obviously kind of, you know, exploring ways to publicly state that they're choosing not to have kids. And at the same time, I'm seeing that there are these regenerative minded communities that are out there now kind of actually building grassroots communities, homesteading, bioregionalism kind of things. And they have this, you know, there's a certain strain of philosophy around children and parenting that's very embracing of even having lots of kids, and this sort of like that you have to understand that if you're going to be ecologically minded, that kids play an essential role in that life, that the nurturing of life, and especially if you can raise children that are regenerative minded, that's part of the solution to the problem, and especially bridging into what comes next. And I was just wondering if you had any insight onto where that tension lies and how it's being mediated and such.
I mean, I great questions again, honestly. And I don't really see it as a tension. I see it as different aspects of feeling into a similar thing. I mean, I just might, as a mother, talk about the last point you make about raising kids to be environmentally aware. I mean, I've done my head in trying to do that. You know, my kids were part of the Steiner system, which is an alternative education system, and we did woodcraft folk. Oh God, the money and time this stuff's taken off me. And the children are raised by the culture of these times. It's a really hard job as a parent to resist that. I find it's one of the places of most grief in my life. I think what I personally feel under the question of what you're saying is a felt experience of life. And so if we have to sort of justify it, oh, well, we're going to raise great kids, well, maybe not, you know, like, so that's a kind of like, is it a utilitarian answer? It's an answer that's saying, oh, if we do this thing, that'll have this impact. Well, we don't know, do we? But I think what I really hear in what you're saying and what I feel is that life has a longing for itself, and we need to orientate to life's longing for itself and to feel ourselves in the flow of life as worthy ancestors, knowing that we're just here for a short time in this form, whatever, I don't know how it all works, and that those that come after us matter. And so, you know, I would never wish to tell anybody that not birthing is something that they should do. You know, on the other hand, those people that are feeling in such deep grief and responsibility, and understand that especially children born into Western consumerist culture are very high carbon footprint, as are our beloved pets and all the rest of it, right? All the other ways in which we connect to life, and you know, maybe there's other ways to connect to nature, but and so people who've been part of Birth Strike, my understanding is that it's not been for one reason. They're definitely not telling people what to do. They're saying how they feel. I don't think they're necessarily signing up forever. They may change their mind, and from my perspective on you know, they should feel free to. They're feeling a responsibility, and I don't see a tension between those two things. I think people trying to figure out how to live a good life in these times is not easy, is it, right? And all the different choices we could make. Yeah, I hope that sort of answered that. It's not one answer, is it? Which is the way of these things, both and all that.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because there is sort of a gentle taboo around this topic, the way I see it, on both sides. Like neither side wants to, both sides have strong feelings, and neither side wants to be moralistic towards the other. And I feel like that's sort of keeping it, it's restricting a free flow of information back and forth. And so I'm just interested in how this evolves. But yeah, I appreciate your answer.
Thank you.
Wayne, you're up next. Oh, you're on mute, Wayne. Looks like he's struggling with the mute button. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I'm struggling with my mute button. Thank you. Yeah, first, Extinction Rebellion is one of my favorite activities when it came to town. We have a small community, and I was the first to get out my musical instruments and hand them out, and drums and everything I could find, pots and pans. there were many elements that I felt were missing within the movement. I'm divided whether antagonist ways of working is not really of the anarchist style. And I work from the heart, so I don't like people being upset and truck drivers getting irritated and violence starting to show up when we're demonstrating on the street. So for me, the essence of food and participating with music and a street event was somewhat more effective than an antagonistic event. And this is something I've always felt, being part of many movements, is that to be conscious of the human element, which is why I'm part of the Stoic movement, is because I believe all humans have something good inside them. And when people are upset, they don't have a possibility to listen. So anyway, these are just my comments. And I've been very much part of these movements, and thoroughly respect the people that take the courage to participate.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne, for your comments and for your participation. And the music's really what makes Extinction Rebellion events. I heard one time, I wish I'd been there, it sounded fun, about a retaking of Parliament Square through the method of the samba band. Samba'd their way back into our Parliament Square. I'm just trying to feel into what you're trying to express here around antagonism, and I think it's the case that, you know, an Extinction Rebellion protest that, say, blocks a road is going to impact the people that just happen to be on that road at the time, and that feels, you know, problematic because they were just trying to go about their business, right? It's done. There's a really beautiful film that has come out of Plum Village on some of the exiled Buddhists, and you can see just the beauty and the remorse of the causing of disruption that can speak in itself. And my experience of that kind of disruption has been that many of the car drivers are actually sort of a bit resigned. Oh, I've been caught up in this, and supportive. This is what it needs. And I suppose, so it's a mixture of responses, but I guess it's a bit like, you know, if a relationship gets into a difficult place, you know, we may want to be positive about it and go and, you know, see a therapist or do some practices together, or, you know, what you might, of the heart, express our love through a beautiful meal or something. And sometimes it's the disruption that happens when it just goes wrong, and we one of us has an affair, or we, you know, just blow our top off and say the wrong thing or whatever. I mean, the disruption that comes into our lives when we get ill and our bodies are telling us something, or we lose a job, or, you know, these the way Daniel Pinchbeck's talked about it is there's something in the, I'm trying to feel into this, but there's something in the no that also needs to be expressed as what the yes is, what we're for. And there's something in humanity feeling deeply a trauma and expressing that, and how that can shift consciousness. And as part of that, I think we do need to express our rejection of this system in a variety of ways. And there are different theories of change out there, aren't there? I mean, there are some that we have to create the new, and I think, you know, yes, like Game B and all that, let's have try things. There are that we have to resist what's happening, that we need to heal ourselves. I mean, I don't feel it myself as an either or choice. I think it feels like all of these. So I mean, we've had protests where the police have started dancing with us. They're getting vast trouble if they get caught and filmed and put out in the Daily Mail and that. But it's not always that the people who get caught up in it. Sometimes I'm told I just came across you guys and I joined you. You know, so I feel like I felt into your question. I don't know if I've really met it in the way that it needed. Do you want to say more?
Well, yeah, I don't want to take up too much time, but my own effort has been to run a repair cafe.
Great.
So that's my anarchist movement. It's entirely harmless. I deal with wealthy elites as well as incredibly impoverished people, and it brings them together because everybody needs something fixed. In a harmless way. So I found that we are very capable to, as our Indigenous folk here in Canada know, is we're constantly making up our own ways of fixing everything and perhaps not really listening to where the problem lies. So these are, my inclusion of their philosophy is incredibly important and integral to my life. And that's where I feel that a lot of the colonial aspect of what we do growing up in England is quite oblivious to the way other humans can participate.
So I mean, what you're talking about with the repair cafe is a form of non-violent direct action. You know, I often say to people, you know, direct action can mean opposing things, but it can mean you go and feed homeless people. You don't just campaign about why homeless people aren't going hungry, or you do the repairing. It's not always easy to repair things, as I'm sure you know, because of how they're designed. They're designed not to be repaired. And so, you know, if we were having a really sensible economic circular economy and all the rest of it, we would be able to have maybe some 3D printers in your repair cafe, and you could download the right component and print it off, and you'd be able to get access to it and so on. So I do think we need both, where we can have a conversation about built-in obsolescence. And if you sort of forgive the immodesty, I got to, you know, mention that kind of thing to Mark Carney, who was the former governor of the Bank of England. He came from Canada, right? In the Reith lectures. I'm not sure that was in the edit, but you know, it's one of the most insane expressions of our economic system is that we, you know, it's extraction and excretion at the other end, and the design community have a conversation about how much we're willing to put up with as consumers, about how quickly things break. It's built in, it's designed to break, you know, and we have to have that conversation too. So I think, you know, the repair cafes are epic, and we need more of that kind of thing, and we need the systemic change. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation and others are pushing to stop us creating you know, products that break. So I just always feel a both and here in this. And I probably need you to say a bit more about what you were trying to communicate about Indigenous culture, and but you know, just to say, for myself, it's you know, I'm a little bit unclear as to what I've already said in this interview and what I said in the previous one, so forgive me. I was talking about Wetiko. Was I talking about that here or in the previous one? I've forgotten. You know, what the most beautiful book I've possibly ever read is by Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass, right? And there's that reconnection to life and to the land, to understand that human beings can not only, and I think it somehow I feel like it relates to Jeff's question, that human beings, it's not just about you know, stopping us harming. It's that we're meant, I believe, we're meant to be here in relationship as part of nature. And that, you know, in the story of sweetgrass, sweetgrass thrives. It needs humanity to pick it, and it's where it doesn't thrive. Like, we're needed by nature, and for us to find our place in life again. And so what you've got in the environmental movement are sort of like really outrageous pushes to, you know, say, you know, 30% of the land shouldn't have people on it. It's kind of all, it's very patriarchal, it's parceling it up with this land, and it's, you know, it's a massive land grab off Indigenous people that's happening right now in the name of environmentalism. Survival International have been really calling it out, and human rights abuse is done off the back of that. So yeah, anyway, I don't know if any of that really met what you were saying. I hope something did.
Thank you, Wayne. So we're at the top of the hour, and we'll close soon. Do you have time for just one more quick question, Gail,
Sure.
that I can sneak in? So one thing that we're interested at the Stoa, as I mentioned, like this meta crisis, this constellation of existential risks, collapse, ecological collapse, and just the various different groups that are looking at it, like the Game B community, metamodernism, you know, the X-Risk, Nick Bostrom folks, effective altruism, William McCaskill, he was here at the Stoa. I'm curious, what is your read on these different movements that are looking at this thing called the meta crisis, and how Extinction Rebellion perhaps interfaces with them or could interface with them?
Oh gosh, you really speak to my heart there, Peter, because I just get to watch the odd Rebel Wisdom video, and I just love them. As I mentioned, Jamie Wheel's latest intervention, the recapture of the rapture, it was a brilliant intervention, and I know that you're doing an active program there. I haven't really had time to fully understand what people are working on, but first of all, to say I'm deeply reassured to know that that work's happening. And some people come to Extinction Rebellion, especially Money Rebellion, with suggestions about alternatives, and quite often it becomes like, oh, it's this form of crypto or whatever, and it just can't be just one thing. I don't believe that. Maybe that is part of the picture. How are we going to assess these things? I did have a really incredible meeting with a woman called Sarah, I've forgotten her second name, who'd worked on something called the Commons platform. And I think she had to take a break from that project, and I don't know where it got to, but I really appreciated the process that she'd gone about to that included many voices to think about how this platform should come about, if we're going to get together as on space and be together. And so, and you know, I don't want to critique something I know next to nothing about. I've heard about Game B that, you know, the sort of people that are involved in the design there isn't sufficient representation of humanity's voices to get the design right. I don't know, you know, I may have misheard that. So but I you know, maybe if I get to stop doing XR and do something else, it's probably part of where I'd like to be, is thinking about what these meta crises are about, what the big shifts about. You know, I mean, I think part of it for me is the need to decriminalize psychedelic as a technology. It's just a particular piece, but I don't know really, Peter. I mean, tell me. I'd love to have a nerd off, like sit down and hear all about it. I'm so curious. I'm a bookaholic, but I also you know, I just don't, when you know what it's like when you're in so many emails and meetings, that there's only so much you can take in. So yeah,
Perhaps
we're talking to the Restorative Practice Alliance. My colleague Skeena's talking to them potentially about working together. That sounded really exciting. Yeah, who knows? I just also what I want to say is XR feels like it's an experiment that's been run. It's a kind of, you know, we're trying to do this decentralized thing. So you know, we sort of talk about things, but in a way it's like, my understanding of patriarchy is a culture of domination, and in some ways we're going to have to figure out how to resist that tendency in us, the wet eco tendency of domination and being fearful around scarcity, and how do we do that? And sometimes that might be the culture that holds us outside of that, and sometimes that to me it feels like it's got a lot to do with togetherness and how we say no to things. And I know we sort of have a negativity around the no, but I think the no and the yes work together, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and it does. And I can geek out about this all day with you as well, I imagine. And so perhaps if you ever feel called to come to the Stoa again, we can have some of these conversations with these different people who are looking at the meta crisis and different facets of it. So we'll close out here. I'll make an announcement in a moment, closing announcements. But Gail, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa today, especially under the conditions that you've been in. And so sending you lots of love from the Stoa, and I hope you do some self-care tonight.
Yeah, thank you. I already went and had a shag and a sleep. That's why I think I managed to come. I think that's my trauma release. You know, I just really appreciated the energy and the quality of the questions here. Makes me feel like I know there's some really good work happening here. So beautiful. Thanks for all what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you again for coming to the Stoa. And we have another event. Probably you can be sleeping at this time, Gail, but Finshorn and the Buddhist Geeks, they're coming in to do a social meditation. It's a mini practicum it's going to be 3 sessions. The first session's at 6 p.m. Eastern time, and just basically meditating within a group. And they have all these kind of beautiful practices. One of them is like the thank you meditation, where you're just in a room and someone says thank you, and whoever feels called says thank you, and then whoever feels called says thank you. And it's kind of deeply nourishing. So if you can avail for that, it's a free event. You can check out on the website stoa.ca. So that being said, Gail, everyone, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa today.